Say Millionaire hires a nanny, only to discover she has a PhD in quantum physics. What happens next will shock you. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The rejection email arrived on a Tuesday morning, grey and merciless as the November sky pressing against Dr. Sarah Chen's studio apartment window in Queens. She read it 3 times, each pass making the words more real, more final. We regret to inform you that your grant application for continued research funding has been denied. Sarah's laptop screen blurred as tears gathered in her eyes. 5 years of research on quantum entanglement applications, countless 18-hour days in the lab, and 3 published papers in prestigious journals, all reduced to a form letter declining her funding renewal. The university had made their priorities clear. Theoretical physics research that couldn't immediately translate to profitable applications was expendable. Her phone buzzed against the cramped kitchen counter. "Mom," flashed on the screen, and Sarah's stomach twisted. She couldn't tell her mother about this, not when the medical bills from her recent chemotherapy treatments were already drowning them both. "Hi, Mom," Sarah answered, forcing brightness into her voice. "Sarah, sweetheart, how's my brilliant daughter today?" Her mother's voice carried that fragile quality it had developed since the cancer diagnosis, hope wrapped in exhaustion. "I'm good, Mom, just working on some research." The lie tasted bitter. "How are you feeling?" "Oh, you know me, still fighting." A pause, then softer. "The hospital called about the payment plan. They need us to increase the monthly amount, or—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. After they hung up, Sarah stared at her bank account on the laptop screen. The numbers told their own story. $847.23 in checking, $3,200 in savings that was already earmarked for her mother's next treatment, and $127,000 in student loan debt that demanded its monthly tribute regardless of her employment status. She pulled up job search websites, her PhD in quantum physics from MIT feeling suddenly worthless. Most positions required years of industry experience she didn't have, or offered salaries that wouldn't cover her basic expenses, let alone her mother's medical bills. That's when she saw it. Nanny wanted, Upper East Side family, excellent compensation, immediate start. Sarah almost scrolled past, but the number stopped her cold. The salary was nearly double what most entry-level research positions offered. She clicked on the listing, her practical mind overriding her wounded pride. Seeking responsible, educated nanny for bright 8-year-old girl. Must be available for evening and weekend care. Previous childcare experience preferred but not required. Discretion and professionalism essential. Competitive salary plus benefits. Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the laptop screen, exhausted, desperate, and about to make a choice that would change everything. She had spent her entire adult life studying the fundamental nature of reality, understanding how particles could exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed and forced to choose. Now she understood what those particles felt like. She clicked apply before she could change her mind. The Hartwell residence occupied an entire floor of a pre-war building on Fifth Avenue, its windows offering commanding views of Central Park. Sarah stood in the marble-floored lobby, acutely aware of her discount blazer and scuffed shoes, amid the polished luxury surrounding her. The doorman had looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism before allowing her to proceed to the 32nd floor. Dr. Chen, a perfectly groomed woman in her 50s, appeared from the private elevator. "I'm Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Hartwell's assistant. Thank you for coming on such short notice." Sarah followed her through a foyer that could have housed her entire Queens apartment. Original artwork lined the walls, pieces she recognized from her college art history courses, now hanging casually in someone's home like expensive wallpaper. "Mr. Hartwell is finishing a call," Mrs. Patterson explained, leading her into a living room where floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a photograph. "He'll be with you shortly. Can I offer you anything? Coffee, water?" "Water would be nice, thank you." Left alone, Sarah tried to calm her racing heart. She had interviewed for research positions, defended her dissertation before panels of intimidating professors, but this felt different, more personal, more desperate. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. Marcus Hartwell entered the room like a force of nature. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair showing distinguished silver at the temples, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His tailored suit probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, but it couldn't quite hide the exhaustion etched around his eyes. "Dr. Chen," his voice was crisp, businesslike, I understand you're interested in the nanny position. Yes, Mr. Hartwell. Thank you for considering me. He studied her with the same intensity she imagined he brought to boardroom negotiations. Your resume is unusual for this type of position. PhD in quantum physics from MIT, multiple published papers, yet you're here applying to watch my daughter. Why? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and direct. Sarah had prepared various diplomatic answers, but something in his straightforward manner made her choose honesty instead. Because I need the job, she said simply. My research funding was cut. My mother is fighting cancer, and the bills don't care about my educational pedigree. I'm overqualified, Mr. Hartwell, but I'm also reliable, dedicated, and smart enough to keep up with any 8-year-old, no matter how bright she might be. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps even respect. Emma is exceptional. She tested into the gifted program at age 6, reads at a high school level, and has worn out 3 tutors in the past year with her questions. Most people find her exhausting. Most people probably don't understand what it's like to have a mind that moves faster than the world around it, Sarah replied. I do. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of running feet echoed from the hallway. A girl with dark curly hair and eyes identical to her father's burst into the room, clutching a tablet and practically vibrating with excitement. Dad, you have to see this documentary about black holes. Did you know that if you fell into one, from your perspective, time would feel normal, but to everyone watching, you'd appear to slow down and eventually freeze at the event horizon. It's called gravitational time dilation, and it's the coolest thing ever. Marcus looked helplessly at his daughter, then at Sarah. Emma, we have a guest. This is Dr. Chen. She's a doctor? Emma's eyes widened as she focused on Sarah for the first time. What kind of doctor? Are you going to give me shots? Sarah smiled, remembering herself at 8, all questions and wild curiosity. I'm not a medical doctor. I study physics. Quantum physics, actually. Emma's tablet clattered to the floor, forgotten. You study quantum physics? Like real quantum physics? With particles and wave functions and quantum entanglement? Exactly like that. Oh my God, Dad, she's perfect. Emma turned to her father with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for Christmas morning. Can she start now? Please. I have a million questions about quantum tunneling. Marcus looked at Sarah, something unreadable crossing his features. In that moment, watching his daughter's face light up with intellectual hunger for the first time in months, Sarah realized that maybe, just maybe, this job might save more than just her bank account. Sarah's alarm buzzed at 6:30 a.m., but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling of her Queen's apartment. Today was her first official day as Emma Hartwell's nanny, a sentence that still felt surreal in her mind. 3 days had passed since the interview, 3 days of background checks, reference calls, and paperwork that made her feel like she was entering witness protection rather than childcare. The subway ride to Manhattan gave her time to review the detailed instructions Mrs. Patterson had provided. Emma's schedule was more complex than most adults. Piano lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays, advanced mathematics tutoring on Wednesdays, Mandarin classes on weekends, and a social calendar that included playdates with the children of other Manhattan elite families. The key, Mrs. Patterson had explained during their orientation meeting, is keeping Emma engaged without overwhelming her. She gets bored easily, and a bored Emma is challenging. Sarah emerged from the subway into the crisp December morning, Central Park's bare trees creating intricate shadows on the sidewalk. The doorman, James, she'd learned his name, nodded with slightly more warmth than during her first visit. Good morning, Dr. Chen. Mr. Hartwell is expecting you. The private elevator whisked her to the 32nd floor, where she found Marcus in the kitchen, wearing a navy suit and juggling a phone call while attempting to pour coffee. Emma sat at the marble island, methodically eating cereal while reading what appeared to be a college-level physics textbook. I don't care what the Tokyo markets are doing. We hold the position until... Marcus spotted Sarah and held up one finger. I'll call you back. He ended the call and turned to her with the expression that mixed relief with exhaustion. Dr. Chen, thank you for being prompt. Sarah, please. And good morning, Emma. Emma looked up from her book, her face brightening. Sarah, I've been reading about quantum field theory. Did you know that according to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, we can never know both the exact position and momentum of a particle at the same time? But here's what I don't understand. If we can't measure both precisely, how do we know particles exist at all? Marcus blinked, clearly out of his depth. Sarah sat down across from Emma, genuinely impressed by the depth of her question. That's actually one of the most fundamental questions in quantum mechanics, Sarah said. The answer has to do with probability waves and observation effects. Want me to show you an experiment we can do to demonstrate it? Really? We can do quantum physics experiments. Some basic ones, absolutely, but first, Sarah glanced at Marcus, who was watching their interaction with fascination. Your dad probably needs to get to work, and you need to finish breakfast. Marcus checked his watch, surprise flickering across his features. You're right, I'm usually gone by now. He hesitated, as if wanting to say something else, then simply nodded. Emma, be good for Sarah. I'll see you tonight. He kissed Emma's forehead, grabbed his briefcase and paused at the kitchen doorway. Dr. Chen, Sarah, my direct number is programmed into the house phone. Call if you need anything. Anything at all. After he left, the apartment felt different, larger somehow, but also more intimate. Emma finished her cereal quickly, then looked at Sarah with barely contained excitement. So about that experiment, Sarah grinned. Let's start with something simple. Do you have a flashlight and some tape? For the next hour, they constructed a basic double-slit experiment using household items. Sarah watched Emma's face as they demonstrated how light could behave as both a wave and a particle, depending on how they observed it. The girls' questions were sharp, insightful, and reminded Sarah why she'd fallen in love with physics in the first place. This is incredible, Emma breathed, watching the interference pattern dance on their makeshift screen. But if observation changes the result, does that mean reality isn't fixed, that it depends on who's looking? Sarah felt a familiar thrill, the same sensation she'd experienced during her best research moments. That's exactly the right question to ask, and the honest answer is we're still figuring that out. As they cleaned up their experiment, Emma grew quieter, more thoughtful. Sarah, can I ask you something that's not about physics? Of course. Why did you really want this job? I mean, you could probably work anywhere doing important science stuff. Why did you want to take care of me? The question was delivered with the directness only children possessed, cutting straight to the heart of things adults spent years dancing around. Sarah sat down on the couch, patting the cushion beside her. You want the truth? Emma nodded solemnly. I needed the money. My mom is sick, and I lost my job at the university. But you know what? Sometimes the things we do because we have to turn out to be the things we needed to do all along. Emma considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. Like quantum tunneling. Sometimes particles can pass through barriers that should be impossible to cross, just because they had to find a way. Sarah felt something warm unfold in her chest, exactly like quantum tunneling. 2 weeks into the job, Sarah had settled into a routine that surprised her with its satisfaction. Mornings were spent on Emma's academic work. Though work hardly described their explorations of advanced mathematics, literature discussions that would challenge graduate students, and science experiments that had taken over the apartment's formal dining room. Afternoons were for Emma's various lessons and social activities, which gave Sarah insight into the rarefied world of Manhattan's elite families. The other nannies were polite but distant, clearly puzzled by Sarah's presence in their carefully ordered hierarchy. She didn't fit their expectations, too educated to be dismissed, too new to be trusted, too different to be easily categorized. It was a Thursday afternoon during Emma's piano lesson when Sarah first noticed the pattern. She was sitting in the Hartwell's study, reviewing Emma's advanced mathematics homework, when her attention was caught by the financial newspapers scattered across Marcus's desk. The headlines were troubling. Tech stocks plummet amid AI regulation fears. Hartwell Industries faces shareholder pressure. Market volatility threatens innovation funding. Sarah wasn't a business expert, but her years in academia had taught her to recognize the signs of institutional pressure. She'd seen brilliant researchers make desperate choices when funding dried up, watched entire departments get gutted when universities shifted priorities. The tension she'd noticed in Marcus's shoulders, the late-night phone calls that echoed through the apartment, the way he sometimes stared out at Central Park, with the expression of a man calculating impossible equations, it all made sense now. When Emma returned from her piano lesson, chattering about Chopin's mathematical precision, Sarah was still thinking about those headlines. Is my dad in trouble? The question caught Sarah off guard. Emma was standing in the study doorway, her usually bright expression clouded with worry. What makes you ask that? Emma entered the room, her small hands fidgeting with the hem of her school uniform. He's been different lately. He works even later than usual, and sometimes I hear him on phone calls where he sounds scared. And yesterday I found him just sitting in the dark in his office, not doing anything. Sarah felt her heart clench. She'd been so focused on Emma's intellectual needs that she'd missed the emotional undercurrents swirling around the child. Adults sometimes go through difficult periods at work, Sarah said carefully. It doesn't mean you need to worry, but it's okay to notice when someone you love seems stressed. I tried asking him about it, but he just says everything's fine and changes the subject. Emma's voice carried a frustration Sarah recognized, the helplessness of a brilliant mind faced with a problem it couldn't solve through pure intellect. Your dad loves you very much. Sometimes adults try to protect children from their worries, even when it's not necessary. Emma was quiet for a long moment, then looked up at Sarah with those penetrating eyes that were so much like her father's. Do you think he's lonely? I mean, besides being worried about work stuff? The question hit Sarah unexpectedly. She thought about Marcus, how he moved through his own home like a guest, how he seemed most comfortable during the brief moments when he was fully engaged with Emma's questions, the way he sometimes looked at them both with something that might have been longing. I think, Sarah said slowly, that your dad has spent so much time taking care of everyone else's needs that he might have forgotten how to take care of his own. That evening, Marcus returned home later than usual, looking exhausted. Sarah was helping Emma with a project on renewable energy systems when they heard his key in the lock. Dad? Emma bounced up from the dining room table, which was covered with diagrams and calculations. You have to see what Sarah and I figured out about solar panel efficiency. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and his usually perfect hair disheveled. But when he saw the elaborate project spread across the table, Emma's careful drawings combined with Sarah's more sophisticated mathematical models, his expression shifted. What is all this? Emma launched into an explanation of their theoretical improvements to photovoltaic cell design, her enthusiasm infectious. Sarah watched Marcus's face as he listened to his daughter speak with passion and precision about complex scientific concepts, saw the moment when his exhaustion gave way to wonder. This is remarkable, he said finally, picking up one of Sarah's calculations. These efficiency improvements, have you run the cost-benefit analysis? Sarah showed me how, Emma said proudly. Want to see? For the next hour, the three of them huddled around the dining room table, refining calculations and exploring possibilities. Sarah found herself stealing glances at Marcus, noting how his whole demeanor changed when he was engaged with a problem that excited rather than threatened him. You know, Marcus said eventually, looking up from a page covered with Sarah's neat equations, my company has been looking for breakthrough innovations in renewable energy. These calculations, they're not just theoretical, are they? Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. I may have gotten a little carried away, old habits from research mode. Don't apologize, this is brilliant work. Marcus met her eyes, and for a moment the polite distance between employer and employee disappeared entirely. Both of you. This is exactly the kind of thinking that could change everything. Emma beamed, but Sarah felt something more complex stirring in her chest, a dangerous warmth that had nothing to do with professional accomplishment and everything to do with the way Marcus was looking at her, as if she were not just his daughter's nanny, but someone whose mind he genuinely respected and valued. I should start getting Emma ready for bed, Sarah said, suddenly needing to re-establish boundaries that felt increasingly blurred. But as she helped Emma put away their project materials, she caught Marcus still studying their calculations, his expression thoughtful and, for the first time since she'd known him, hopeful. December snow blanketed Central Park like a pristine equation, beautiful and complex in its crystalline mathematics. Sarah stood at the living room windows, watching Emma build what appeared to be an architecturally sound snowman in the building's private courtyard below, complete with calculated proportions and engineered stability. 3 weeks had passed since the solar panel project, and something fundamental had shifted in the Hartwell household's dynamics. Marcus had started coming home earlier, lingering over dinner conversations that ranged from Emma's latest intellectual discoveries to Sarah's insights on renewable energy applications. The professional boundaries that had once felt so clear were becoming increasingly blurred. She's remarkable, isn't she? Sarah turned to find Marcus standing beside her, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He handed her one. their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange, a contact that sent an unwelcome flutter through her chest. "She gets her brilliance from somewhere," Sarah replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. The December morning was crisp, and the apartment's large windows let in more cold than warmth. Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching his daughter apply what appeared to be principles of structural engineering to snowman construction. Her mother was like that. Analytical, fearless in pursuing solutions to impossible problems. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife unprompted. Sarah had learned the basic facts from Mrs. Patterson: cancer, 2-year battle, Emma only 6 when she died, but Marcus had never shared anything personal about his marriage. "She would have loved watching Emma with you," he continued. "Rachel always said Emma needed someone who could match her intellectually, not just manage her schedule. I'm sure she would have been an amazing guide for Emma herself." She would have been. Marcus's voice carried a weight of old grief, but also something else, a gradual acceptance, perhaps. "But she's not here, and somehow you are. And Emma is thriving in ways I didn't think possible anymore." The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to address directly. Sarah sipped her coffee, hyper-aware of Marcus's proximity and the way the morning light caught the silver in his hair. "Mr. Hartwell." "Marcus, please. I think we're past formalities, don't you?" Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Hospital wants to discuss payment options. Can you call today?" The message was like cold water, reminding Sarah exactly why she was here and what her priorities needed to be. She was Emma's nanny, nothing more, regardless of whatever complicated feelings were developing. "I should check on Emma," she said, stepping away from the window and the dangerous intimacy of the moment. But Marcus caught her arm gently. "Sarah, is everything all right? You've seemed distracted lately." She looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his concerned expression. For a moment, she was tempted to tell him everything, about her mother's worsening condition, the mounting medical bills, the constant anxiety that kept her awake at night, calculating and recalculating numbers that never added up to enough. "Just family stuff," she said instead. "Nothing I can't handle." Marcus studied her face with the same intensity he brought to business decisions. "If you need anything." "I'm fine." The words came out sharper than she intended. "Really? I should go help Emma with her snow engineering project." As she headed toward the door, Sarah caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. She looked tired, stressed, and dangerously close to caring too much about a life that wasn't really hers. That afternoon, while Emma was at her Mandarin lesson, Sarah called the hospital billing department from the apartment's quiet study. "Dr. Chen?" "Yes, I've been trying to reach you. Your mother's account is significantly overdue, and we need to discuss immediate payment arrangements." Sarah closed her eyes, doing rapid mental calculations. "How much are we talking about?" "The current balance is $47,000, with additional treatments scheduled for next month. We'll need at least $15,000 by Friday to continue her care plan." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. Her entire monthly salary wouldn't cover half of that amount. Are there any assistance programs? Payment plan modifications? "I'm afraid your mother's case has already been reviewed for all available options. Without significant payment, we'll have to suspend non-emergency treatments." After hanging up, Sarah sat in Marcus's leather chair, surrounded by his success, the awards on the walls, the financial publications, the casual evidence of wealth beyond her comprehension, and felt the weight of her own limitations crushing down. Her phone rang. Emma's tutor. "Dr. Chen, Emma seems unwell today. She's very quiet and isn't engaging with the lesson material. Should I bring her home early?" 20 minutes later, Sarah found Emma curled up on the living room couch, looking smaller and younger than her 8 years. "Hey, sweetheart, Mrs. Wang said you weren't feeling well." Emma looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "I heard you on the phone about your mom being sick." Sarah's heart clenched. "Emma, you shouldn't have—" "Is she going to die like my mom did?" The question was delivered with devastating directness. Sarah sat down on the couch, pulling Emma into her arms. "My mom is very sick, but the doctors are taking good care of her. Sometimes adults have to deal with scary things, but that doesn't mean you need to worry about them." "But you're worried. I can tell. You get this look on your face, like my dad does when he's trying to solve problems that don't have good solutions." Sarah was constantly amazed by Emma's emotional intelligence, but right now she wished the child were a little less perceptive. You're right. I am worried. But grown-ups worry about things so kids don't have to. Emma was quiet for a long moment, then looked up at Sarah with those penetrating eyes. What if we helped each other? Like particles in quantum entanglement. When something happens to one, it affects the other instantly, no matter how far apart they are. Despite everything, Sarah smiled. That's beautiful, Emma, but some problems are too big for quantum physics. Maybe. But maybe some problems just need the right kind of thinking. Marcus found them on the couch an hour later, Emma asleep against Sarah's shoulder, while Sarah stared out at the darkening sky. He'd left his last meeting early, driven by an instinct he couldn't quite name, and arrived home to find his usually energetic daughter subdued and his composed Nanny looking fragile. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly, not wanting to wake Emma. Sarah looked up and Marcus was struck by the exhaustion in her eyes, a bone-deep weariness that went beyond physical tiredness. "Just a difficult day," she said softly. She was worried about something she overheard. Marcus carefully lifted Emma from Sarah's arms, noting how his daughter automatically curled against him, even in sleep. As he carried her to her bedroom, he found himself thinking about Sarah's expression, the careful way she'd deflected his earlier questions, the phone call she'd taken in his study. When he returned to the living room, Sarah was standing by the windows again, her posture tense. "Sarah," he kept his voice gentle, "what's really going on?" For a moment he thought she might deflect again. Then her shoulders sagged slightly, as if the effort of maintaining her composure had become too much. "My mother is dying," she said simply. "Cancer. The treatments are keeping her stable, but they're expensive, and I'm running out of options." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct that surprised him with its intensity. "How much do you need?" Sarah turned, shaking her head. "I can't." "How much?" 47,000 for the current balance, and probably another 30,000 over the next few months. The numbers came out in a rush as if she were ripping off a bandage. "But Marcus, I'm not telling you this because I want—" "Done." Sarah stared at him. "What?" "I'll transfer the money tonight. Full amount, plus a buffer for future treatments." "You can't just—" "I can, and I am." Marcus moved closer, his business instincts taking over. "But I want something in return." Sarah's expression grew wary. "What kind of something?" "I want you to consider a permanent position with my family. Not as a nanny, as Emma's private tutor and educational consultant, full benefits, salary commensurate with your qualifications, and flexibility to continue your own research." "Marcus, that's incredibly generous, but there's more." He took a breath, knowing he was about to cross a line that would change everything. "I want you to consider joining my company as a consultant on renewable energy projects. Your solar panel calculations weren't just impressive, they're revolutionary. My engineering team has been working on implementing your efficiency models, and early tests show potential for industry disruption." Sarah sank into a chair, looking overwhelmed. "You're offering me my research funding back. I'm offering you a chance to do meaningful science while providing Emma with the intellectual guidance she needs, and—" He paused, suddenly aware that his next words would reveal more than he'd intended. "And I'm offering our family a chance to keep someone who's become incredibly important to both of us." The admission hung in the air between them. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "This isn't charity. This is business. Smart business. Emma has learned more in the past month than in the previous year combined. Your research could save my company and potentially change how the world approaches renewable energy. And personally," he ran a hand through his hair, abandoning his usual corporate composure, "personally, I can't imagine our lives without you in them anymore." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus found himself holding his breath. "There's something else you should know," she said finally. "My former research mentor contacted me yesterday. He's offering me a position at CERN. Full funding, unlimited research time, everything I thought I wanted." Marcus felt his heart sink, but he kept his expression neutral. "That's an incredible opportunity." "It is, but it would mean leaving immediately, moving to Switzerland, and giving up." She looked around the apartment, her gaze lingering on Emma's science project scattered across the dining room table. "Giving up the life I'm building here. What are you going to do?" Sarah met his eyes, and Marcus saw his own hopes reflected in her expression, complicated, uncertain, but undeniably real. "I'm going to make a choice that a month ago would have seemed impossible," she said softly. "I'm going to choose the option that feels like home." The CERN acceptance letter sat on Sarah's kitchen table like an elegant time bomb, its Swiss postmark and official letterhead promising everything she'd worked toward for years. Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman's signature at the bottom carried the weight of international recognition, unlimited research funding, and access to the world's most advanced particle accelerator. Sarah had read it 17 times since it arrived that morning, each pass making the opportunity feel more surreal and the decision more impossible. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Emma's asking if you can help her with a very important scientific experiment before dinner. Fair warning, it involves the kitchen and something called crystallization dynamics." Despite her turmoil, Sarah smiled. 3 days had passed since Marcus's offer, 3 days of careful professional distance that fooled no one. Emma had noticed the tension immediately, responding with the kind of scientific focus she usually reserved for particularly challenging physics problems. Sarah gathered her things and headed to Manhattan, the CERN letter tucked safely in her bag like a secret. On the subway, she practiced different versions of the conversation she needed to have with Marcus. Each scenario felt inadequate for the complexity of what she was facing. The Hartwell apartment buzzed with Emma's barely contained excitement when Sarah arrived. The dining room had been transformed into what appeared to be an advanced chemistry laboratory, complete with labeled beakers, precise measurements, and a notebook filled with Emma's careful observations. "Sarah, perfect timing!" Emma bounced over, her dark curls escaping from a makeshift lab coat that was clearly one of Marcus's dress shirts. "I'm testing different supersaturation ratios to create the most stable crystal formations, but I need your help with the mathematical modeling." Marcus appeared from the kitchen, holding a tray of what looked suspiciously like saltwater solutions. "She's been planning this all day. I've been relegated to laboratory assistant." "Very important work," Sarah said solemnly, accepting her own improvised lab coat. "What's our hypothesis?" For the next 2 hours, they lost themselves in Emma's crystallization experiment. Sarah found herself genuinely impressed by the 8-year-old's systematic approach and careful documentation. Marcus proved to be a surprisingly competent lab assistant, following Emma's detailed instructions with the same attention he brought to board meetings. "Look!" Emma pointed excitedly at one of her solutions, where delicate crystals were beginning to form. "The ones with higher salt concentration are creating more complex geometric patterns, just like you predicted with the mathematical model." Sarah studied the emerging crystals, noting their intricate structures. "What do you think causes the different patterns?" "The molecules have more neighbors to interact with in the concentrated solution, so they can form more stable arrangements. It's like people. Sometimes you need the right conditions and the right companions to create something beautiful." Marcus looked up sharply at his daughter's words, his eyes meeting Sarah's across the table. The metaphor hung between them, loaded with implications that had nothing to do with crystallization and everything to do with the complicated dynamics of their makeshift family. After Emma went to bed, Sarah and Marcus found themselves in the study, ostensibly reviewing Emma's experimental data, but really avoiding the conversation they both knew was coming. "She's exceptional," Sarah said, watching Marcus organize Emma's careful notes. "Her approach to problem-solving is remarkably mature. She gets that from her mother." Marcus set down the papers and looked at Sarah directly. "And from you. The way she thinks about complex systems, the confidence she has in her own intellectual abilities, that's changed since you've been here." Sarah felt the familiar warmth that came with recognition of her impact on Emma. But tonight, it was accompanied by a sharp pang of loss. "She'll continue to thrive regardless of what I decide." "Will she?" Marcus's voice was quiet, but intense. "Or are you about to become another person who disappears from her life just when she needs you most?" The words hit harder than Sarah expected. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Marcus stood, beginning to pace, a habit Sarah had noticed when he was working through particularly challenging problems. "CERN is an incredible opportunity. I understand that. But Emma doesn't understand why the adults she cares about keep leaving. She'll understand eventually. This is about my career, my life's work." "Your life's work?" Marcus stopped pacing, fixing her with the full intensity of his attention. "Sarah, in 6 weeks, you've revolutionized my daughter's education, contributed breakthrough research to renewable energy applications, and become integral to our family in ways I didn't think were possible anymore. If that's not life's work, what is?" Sarah felt tears threatening. "You don't understand. I've wanted this since I was Emma's age. CERN represents validation of everything I've sacrificed for science. And what about the validation you've found here? The research you could do with unlimited funding and real-world applications? The difference you're making in Emma's life? It's not the same. Why? Because it's not pure research? Because it involves caring about people instead of just particles? The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth. Sarah had spent years defining herself through academic achievement, measuring worth by publications and peer recognition rather than human impact. "I need some air," she said, moving toward the windows that overlooked Central Park. Marcus followed, his reflection joining hers in the dark glass. "Sarah, I'm not trying to guilt you into staying, but I need you to understand what you'd be walking away from." She turned to face him, acutely aware of how close they were standing. "And what would that be? A chance to do meaningful science that actually changes lives. A relationship with Emma that's already transforming her understanding of what's possible. And," he paused, his usual corporate confidence faltering, "and whatever this is between us that we've been pretending doesn't exist." The admission hung in the air like a charged particle, impossible to ignore or take back. Sarah felt her carefully maintained professional boundaries crumbling. "Marcus, I know it's complicated. I know there are professional considerations and Emma's well-being, and a dozen reasons why we should keep pretending this is just about employment. But somewhere between quantum physics discussions and crystallization experiments, I stopped being able to imagine my life, our lives, without you." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "And if I stay, what then? I become your live-in researcher, your daughter's tutor, and what, your girlfriend? How long before that gets complicated?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "But I know that running away to Switzerland because the situation is complicated isn't the solution either." Sarah spent that night walking through Queens, her neighborhood streets offering perspective that Manhattan's luxury couldn't provide. She called her mother from the hospital parking lot, needing to hear her voice before making a decision that would affect both their futures. "You sound troubled, sweetheart," her mother said, after they'd covered the usual topics of treatment schedules and doctor appointments. "I'm facing a choice between two good opportunities, and I'm not sure how to decide." "Tell me about them." Sarah found herself describing both options, CERN's prestige and research freedom versus Marcus's offer and the life she'd been building with Emma. As she talked, she realized she was spending more time explaining the complexities of staying than the simplicities of leaving. "This Marcus," her mother said when Sarah finished, "he sounds like a good man." "It's not about him, Mom. It's about my career, my research." "Is it? Because from what you've told me, you're doing more meaningful work there than you did at the university. And this little girl you care about, Emma, she needs you. But CERN is everything I've worked toward. Sometimes what we work toward and what we need turn out to be different things." Her mother's voice carried the wisdom of someone who'd faced her own impossible choices. "Sarah, I've watched you these past weeks and you sound happier than you have in years. That's not nothing." The next morning, Sarah arrived at the Hartwell apartment to find Emma sitting at the kitchen counter, methodically eating cereal while reading a thick book on quantum field theory. "Good morning, scientist," Sarah said, noting Emma's unusually subdued mood. "Morning." Emma didn't look up from her book. Sarah poured herself coffee, studying Emma's posture. "Everything okay? Are you leaving?" The question was delivered without preamble, Emma's eyes finally meeting Sarah's with the kind of direct intensity that reminded her painfully of Marcus. "What makes you ask that?" "Dad's been doing his worried pacing thing and you've been distracted. And yesterday I heard Mrs. Patterson talking to someone about transition plans." Emma closed her book, giving Sarah her full attention. "Plus, you get this look on your face when you're calculating probabilities for difficult decisions." Sarah sat down across from Emma, marveling again at the child's perceptiveness. "I've been offered a research position in Switzerland. It's a very prestigious opportunity. But you don't want to go." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Emma's voice carried surprising firmness. "Either you want to go or you want to stay. Everything else is just noise." "Emma, adult decisions involve more factors than just what we want." "Like what? Money? Dad already offered to pay you to stay. Recognition? You're already doing important work here. Research opportunities? Dad said you could have unlimited funding for renewable energy projects." Sarah blinked, surprised by Emma's comprehensive understanding of the situation. You've been listening to a lot of conversations you shouldn't have been listening to. I'm 8, not deaf. And I'm good at quantum mechanics, so I understand entanglement. Emma leaned forward, her expression earnest. You, me, and Dad, we're entangled now. What affects one of us affects all of us, no matter how far apart we might be. Emma, if you leave, you'll be sad because you'll miss us. I'll be sad because another person I care about disappeared. And Dad will be sad because he's in love with you. Sarah felt her breath catch. Emma, your father isn't... Yes, he is. He looks at you the way he used to look at Mom, like you're the most interesting problem he's ever encountered, and he can't wait to spend the rest of his life figuring you out. The observation was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone Emma usually reserved for scientific facts, but it hit Sarah with the force of revelation. Before she could respond, Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, clearly having overheard at least part of the conversation. Emma, shouldn't you be getting ready for school? I'm making a scientific observation about quantum entanglement and emotional probability matrices, Emma replied primly. It's very important research. Marcus looked at Sarah, his expression unreadable. Perhaps you could conduct your research upstairs while Dr. Chen and I finish discussing professional matters. Emma rolled her eyes with the exaggerated patience of someone dealing with particularly slow adults. Fine, but remember what I said about entanglement. Once particles are connected, they stay connected forever, no matter what. After Emma left, Marcus and Sarah sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Marcus spoke. I'm sorry. She's been worried, and when Emma's worried, she tends to analyze everything with uncomfortable accuracy. Is she right? Sarah asked quietly. About the entanglement. Marcus met her eyes, his usual corporate composure completely absent. What do you think? Sarah felt the last of her resistance crumble. She thought about Emma's crystallization experiment, how the right conditions and companions could create something beautiful and stable. She thought about her mother's advice, about meaningful work versus prestigious work, about the difference between what she'd always wanted and what she actually needed. I think, she said slowly, that I need to call CERN and decline their offer. Marcus's expression shifted from guarded hope to something that looked suspiciously like relief. Are you sure? I'm sure that Emma is right about entanglement, and I'm sure that some opportunities, the really important ones, come disguised as complications rather than achievements. Marcus stood and moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. And what about the other thing Emma mentioned? About how I look at you. Sarah felt her heart racing as she looked up at him. What about it? She's right about that too, Marcus said softly. Completely embarrassingly right. That could complicate our professional relationship. Dr. Chen, Marcus said, his voice carrying a warmth she'd never heard before, I think our professional relationship became complicated the moment you started teaching my daughter quantum physics and making me remember what it feels like to look forward to coming home. Sarah reached for his hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit with hers. So what do we do now? Now we figure it out together, all of us, like particles in a stable system, creating something more complex and beautiful than any of us could manage alone. From upstairs, Emma's voice carried down to them. Finally, I was starting to think you'd never figure out the obvious solution. Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. I think we're going to have our hands full with that one. Good, Marcus said, bringing her hand to his lips. I was hoping for a challenge worthy of our combined intellectual capabilities. 6 months later, the Hartwell Industries Renewable Energy Division occupied an entire floor of the Manhattan headquarters, with Dr. Sarah Chen's name on the door of the corner office that overlooked Central Park. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had a better view from her corporate office than she'd ever had from her Queen's apartment. The efficiency improvements are exceeding all projections, Dr. James Morrison, her newly hired research director, reported during their weekly team meeting. The pilot installation in California is showing 37% better performance than traditional solar arrays. Sarah nodded, reviewing the data on her tablet while keeping one eye on the time. Emma's science fair was in 2 hours, and she'd promised to be there early for moral support and last-minute experiment adjustments. Excellent work, everyone. Let's schedule a presentation for the board next week. She closed her laptop and gathered her things. I need to leave early today for a very important scientific consultation. Her team exchanged knowing smiles. Everyone in the office had learned that Dr. Chen's scientific consultations with Emma Hartwell often yielded breakthrough innovations that transformed entire project directions. Sarah took the private elevator to the executive floor, where Marcus's assistant waved her through to his office without announcing her, a privilege that still felt surreal after months of working in the same building. She found Marcus on a video call with the Tokyo office, his sleeves rolled up, and his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, in a way that had become endearingly familiar. "Yes, I understand the market concerns, but our renewable energy division is already showing returns that exceed our most optimistic projections. Dr. Chen's innovations have positioned us ahead of every major competitor." He spotted Sarah and held up one finger, his expression softening. "I'll call you back tomorrow with the full quarterly analysis." "Important meeting?" Sarah asked as he ended the call. "Shareholders wondering how a nanny became our chief innovation officer and tripled our renewable energy profits in 6 months. Marcus stood and moved around his desk, a gesture that still made Sarah's heart skip despite their months together. "I keep telling them it's simple quantum mechanics. Everything's quantum mechanics if you think about it properly." "Exactly." He kissed her softly, a greeting that felt both natural and miraculous. "Ready for the science fair?" Emma's been practicing her presentation since breakfast. "What's her project again?" "Practical applications of quantum tunneling in everyday life. She's convinced she can demonstrate quantum effects using household items and mathematical models." Sarah laughed. "Of course she is. Did you tell her that most PhD students struggle with quantum tunneling theory?" "I tried." She pointed out that most PhD students don't have access to their very own quantum physicist for consultations. They walked together toward the elevator, their easy companionship a source of constant wonder for Sarah. The past 6 months had been a masterclass in how complicated situations could resolve into elegant solutions when the right variables aligned. The transition from nanny to family member had been surprisingly smooth, aided by Emma's matter-of-fact acceptance of their evolving relationship and Marcus's ability to navigate complex negotiations, whether corporate or personal. "There's something I wanted to discuss with you," Marcus said as they reached his car. "Emma's been asking about summer plans." "Science camp?" "Actually, she wants to visit your mother. She's been reading about cancer research and has some hypotheses about combining traditional treatments with targeted therapy approaches." Sarah felt the familiar surge of affection for Emma's boundless curiosity and compassion. Her mother's health had stabilized significantly with consistent treatment, and the two had developed a close relationship through weekly video calls where they discussed everything from quantum physics to Emma's latest experiments. "She wants to present her research to Mom's oncology team, doesn't she? She may have mentioned designing a comprehensive treatment optimization protocol." Marcus grinned. "I told her she'd need to clear it with her chief scientific advisor first." "Well, her methodology is usually sound, even if her scope tends toward the ambitious." They arrived at Emma's school to find the gymnasium transformed into a showcase of elementary scientific achievement. Emma's table stood out immediately, not just for its sophisticated display, but for the small crowd of adults examining her work with obvious bewilderment. "There she is," Marcus said proudly, pointing to where Emma was enthusiastically explaining quantum tunneling to a group of parents using a diagram that would have challenged graduate students. "So you see, the particle doesn't actually go through the barrier in the classical sense. It exists in a probability state that allows it to appear on the other side without traveling through the intervening space. It's like how love works. It doesn't follow logical pathways, it just appears where it's supposed to be." Sarah and Marcus exchanged amused glances. Emma had recently begun incorporating relationship metaphors into her scientific explanations, a development that both delighted and embarrassed her father. "Emma," Sarah called out, approaching the display table. "How's the presentation going?" "Sarah, perfect timing." Emma's face lit up. "I was just explaining quantum tunneling using Mom and Dad's relationship as a practical example." Several parents looked confused, but Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the school's science coordinator, was studying Emma's mathematical models with genuine interest. "Dr. Chen, is this analysis actually accurate? The quantum mechanical calculations appear remarkably sophisticated for elementary level." "Emma's work is always rigorous," Sarah replied, examining the display with professional pride. "She has an intuitive understanding of complex systems that most researchers would envy." "The most interesting part," Emma continued, addressing the gathered adults with the confidence of someone presenting to a scientific conference, "is that quantum tunneling shows us that barriers aren't always absolute. Sometimes particles or people can get to where they need to be even when logic says it should be impossible. Marcus cleared his throat. I think what Emma means. I mean that Sarah was supposed to be a physicist working at a big important laboratory, and Dad was supposed to be alone forever because Mom died, and I was supposed to be stuck with boring tutors who didn't understand why I asked so many questions. Emma's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone she used for presenting experimental conclusions, but somehow Sarah ended up here with us instead, even though there was no logical pathway for that to happen. Quantum tunneling. The crowd had grown quiet, drawn in by Emma's earnest explanation. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the simple profundity of the child's understanding. And that's how we became entangled, Emma concluded, gesturing to the three of them. Now we exist as a stable system that's more interesting than any of us would have been separately. Dr. Walsh looked between Sarah, Marcus, and Emma with dawning comprehension. This is actually a very sophisticated analysis of quantum mechanical principles applied to complex systems theory. Emma's insights often surprise us, Marcus said, his voice warm with pride and love. As the evening wound down and parents began collecting their children, the three of them found themselves alone at Emma's table, surrounded by the remnants of her ambitious presentation. So, Sarah said, helping Emma pack up her materials, ready for the next experiment? Always, Emma replied. But I think we should focus on applied research for a while. Less theory, more practical applications. What kind of practical applications? Marcus asked. Emma looked between them with the expression she wore when contemplating particularly interesting problems. Well, I've been thinking about the house. It's really big for just the three of us. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances, recognizing the tone that usually preceded Emma's most ambitious projects. And, Sarah prompted, and I think it might be time to start researching the practical applications of family expansion. You know, for scientific purposes. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. Emma, I mean, if we're going to be a stable family system, we should probably investigate all possible configurations, maybe run some experiments on optimal family dynamics. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she couldn't help smiling at Emma's typically methodical approach to what most people would consider deeply personal decisions. That's quite an advanced research proposal, Sarah managed. I've been reading about it, Emma said seriously. And statistically, expanded family units show improved stability and happiness metrics. Plus, I think I'd be an excellent big sister. I have a lot of scientific knowledge to share. Marcus looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed panic, amusement, and something that might have been hope. Perhaps we should table this particular research proposal for now. Fine, Emma said with the long-suffering patience of someone dealing with slow learners. But when you're ready to proceed with the experiment, I've already designed a preliminary protocol. 1 year later, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the same gymnasium, but this time as a parent rather than a curious observer. Emma, now 9 and somehow even more precocious, was presenting her latest project, renewable energy applications in urban educational environments. The theoretical framework is sound, Emma was explaining to the judges, but the real innovation comes from the implementation strategy my mom designed. Sarah felt the familiar flutter of joy whenever Emma casually referred to her as Mom, a designation that had evolved naturally over months of shared experiments, bedtime stories about famous scientists, and discussions about everything from quantum mechanics to friendship dynamics. Your daughter is remarkable, commented Dr. Patricia Rodriguez, the district's science education coordinator. This proposal could actually be implemented in schools throughout the city. She gets her ambition from her father and her analytical skills from extensive consultation with quantum physicists, Sarah replied, watching Emma field questions with the composure of someone presenting to the Nobel Prize Committee. Marcus appeared beside them, having hurried from a board meeting that he'd cut short specifically to attend Emma's presentation. How's our resident genius performing? He asked quietly. She's currently explaining how her renewable energy system could power not just the school, but serve as a teaching tool for advanced mathematics and environmental science curricula, Sarah whispered back. The judges looked terrified and impressed in equal measure. Standard Emma effect. They watched as Emma concluded her presentation with a detailed cost-benefit analysis that included environmental impact projections and educational outcome metrics. The judges thanked her with the slightly stunned expressions of adults who'd been intellectually outmaneuvered by a fourth grader. "Think she'll win?" Marcus asked as they walked toward the refreshment table. "I think the real question is whether the judges understand enough of her project to properly evaluate it," Sarah replied. "But honestly, I'm more proud of how she's learned to communicate complex ideas to different audiences. That's definitely something she picked up from you. And the business acumen is pure Hartwell genetics." They found Emma by the dessert table, holding court with several younger students who were listening with rapt attention to her explanation of photovoltaic cell efficiency. "And that's why the angle of installation matters so much," Emma was saying. "It's all about maximizing photon absorption while minimizing reflection loss." "Emma," Sarah called out, "maybe save some advanced physics for when they're in high school." "But they asked," Emma protested, her face lighting up when she saw them. "Did you hear my presentation?" I think Judge Martinez understood the mathematical modeling, but Dr. Kim looked confused during the implementation timeline section. "Your presentation was excellent," Marcus assured her. "Very thorough and well organized." "Good, because I'm thinking about expanding the project for the state science fair. I want to include a section on how renewable energy education could be integrated into all grade levels, not just high school physics." Sarah and Marcus exchanged the look that had become their shorthand for, "Our daughter is planning to revolutionize the entire educational system again." "That sounds like an ambitious summer project," Sarah said carefully. "Actually, I was hoping we could work on it during our honeymoon," Emma said with the casual tone she used for discussing particularly interesting experimental variables. Marcus blinked. "Our what?" "Your honeymoon. You know, after you get married next month." Emma looked between them with the patient expression she wore when explaining obvious concepts. "I mean, you've been engaged for 3 months. The wedding planning is basically finished, and you'll need something intellectually stimulating to do besides just sitting on beaches." Sarah felt Marcus take her hand, his engagement ring, a simple band with a diamond that caught light like a precisely aligned crystal, warm against her finger. "Emma," Marcus said slowly, "most people use honeymoons for relaxation, not advanced research projects." "Most people aren't us," Emma pointed out reasonably. "Besides, I already researched the location. Fiji has excellent solar exposure for practical renewable energy demonstrations, and the local schools have expressed interest in educational partnerships." "You contacted schools in Fiji?" Sarah asked, torn between exasperation and admiration. "Preliminary inquiries only. I thought it would be nice to combine your romantic vacation with meaningful scientific outreach." Marcus laughed, the sound rich with affection and surrender. "Of course you did. I also think it would be good practice for when we start our family expansion experiments," Emma continued with scientific matter-of-factness. "Working together as a team, dividing responsibilities, coordinating complex projects, all essential skills for optimal family dynamics." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. The family expansion experiments had become Emma's preferred euphemism for her campaign to acquire siblings, a research project she pursued with the same systematic determination she brought to all her scientific endeavors. "Emma," Sarah said gently, "we've discussed this. Some experiments take time to design properly. I know, but you've been researching for almost a year now, and you're both excellent at collaboration. I think you're ready to move from theoretical planning to practical application." Before either adult could respond, the announcement of science fair winners interrupted their conversation. Emma placed first in her grade category, a result that surprised no one except Emma herself, who had apparently identified several areas where her presentation could have been more comprehensive. Later that evening, after Emma had fallen asleep surrounded by her science fair ribbon and 3 new library books about sustainable engineering, Sarah and Marcus found themselves on the apartment's balcony, looking out over Central Park. "She's right, you know," Marcus said quietly, "about the honeymoon project. It would be just like us to turn a romantic vacation into an international education initiative." "And about the other thing?" Sarah asked, leaning into his warmth. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her. "I've been thinking about that too. Not because Emma keeps conducting research on optimal family sizes, but because—" He paused, searching for words. "Because when I watch you with Emma, I see how natural this is for you, how much joy you find in nurturing brilliant minds and impossible dreams." Sarah felt her heart skip. "Marcus, I know we planned to wait until after the wedding, until your renewable energy division was fully established, until we had all our variables perfectly controlled. He turned to face her, his expression serious, but warm. But maybe some of the best things happen when we stop trying to control every variable and just trust the process. Are you suggesting we take Emma's advice and move from theoretical to practical application? I'm suggesting that quantum tunneling works both ways. Sometimes the impossible path turns out to be exactly where you were meant to end up. Sarah thought about the past 2 years, how losing her research funding had led her to Emma, how a temporary job had become a life, how trying to escape her problems had brought her to the exact place she needed to be. In that case, she said, reaching up to kiss him, I think it's time to design our next experiment. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Well, if we follow Emma's research protocol, she'll want to be involved in every stage of planning and implementation. Marcus groaned. She's going to want to monitor variables and document the entire process, isn't she? Marcus, our daughter once turned crystallization into a metaphor for family dynamics. Do you really think she's going to approach this with anything less than complete scientific rigor? Our daughter, Marcus repeated softly, as if testing the words. I love how that sounds. Me too. And I love how excited she's going to be when we tell her we're ready to proceed with her family expansion research. Should we be concerned that our 9-year-old is going to want to conduct a literature review on optimal pregnancy nutrition and child development theory? Sarah laughed, imagining Emma's enthusiastic response to their news. Marcus, we fell in love over quantum physics discussions and solar panel efficiency calculations. Did you really expect conventional family dynamics? No, he said, pulling her closer. I expected exactly this. Complicated, brilliant, impossible, and perfect. Above them, the stars shone like distant possibilities, and Sarah realized that sometimes the most elegant solutions were the ones you never saw coming, the ones that appeared through quantum tunneling, defying logic, but creating something more beautiful than any equation could predict. In the apartment behind them, Emma slept peacefully, probably dreaming of new experiments and revolutionary discoveries, completely unaware that her greatest research project was about to begin.